afternoon, everybody. Just a couple minutes before 5. Appreciate all of our reporters who have hung on with us this afternoon. At this time, I will turn it over to Chairperson Lyles.
Thank you for your patience. As you know, you don't rush things and discussions and questions during this time that we are experiencing in our city and in other cities across the state and across this country. I want to say to our residents here is that we completely understand the horror and difficulty of watching a television screen with even alone or with your family to explain how someone can lose their life to people that are supposed to serve and protect. And that happened in Minneapolis. And as a result of that happening, we've seen a lot of demonstrations and protests across the country, and Charlotte is not immune to that. We started last night over on the Beatties Ford Road corridor, the center of our historic African-American growth in this city, close to Johnson C. Smith, right at the corner where the Excelsior Club is being renovated and preserved. So as a part of all of these actions that we've taken today, thinking about last night and making sure that people have the right to express their frustration and anger and to do it in a way that respects the public safety of our city and our neighborhoods, we have declared a state of emergency that we hope that we don't have to use, but allows us to call on the state for resources and needs that we may have as things continue. We want people to protest safely, and we want people to be heard. And the City Council, who stands behind me, is talking about that right now. And one of the things that I'm always most comfortable with is saying that I may not have all of the answers, and I think that the City Council is saying the same thing today, that we may not have all the answers, and it's going to take everyone in our community to help us decide what those answers can be, and even for us to form the questions and the ability for that to be done takes some time and energy that we're all willing to commit to a council member, whether they live in District 7 where they may not be experiencing the same kinds of hurt and frustration that we are experiencing in District 2, where I think that we at our very core of the ability to serve, be elected and serve this community, it's because it doesn't matter where we live. What we care about is our entire community. And so what I want to say to all of you is that we want protests to be heard. We want it to be safely. We want to do it in a way that protects our residents, our neighborhoods, our communities. And I say that because for the last 8 weeks, we've been sitting and establishing social distancing. And we've been apart for a very long time. And I know that as a mom and a grandmom, that that's not always the best thing that happens. Loneliness can sometimes create things that are difficult for us as a people, and we want to do something. So we don't have a step that we're going to take. There's not going to be any fast announcement of a next new program. What we're going to be is deliberate listeners, and we're going to try very hard to address the needs that we are seeing at this great time of a pandemic. It's this great time that we find African-American men jeopardized in so many ways. And at this great time that Charlotte has the opportunity as the 15th largest city in this country to be a model for what happens. So I'm going to be available for questions. Chief Estes will also be available for questions about what happened last night. None of us can predict what the next few hours will bring, but we can all pray and hope that they bring protest in a way that we can hold our heads up high and respect each other and treat each other well. Corey, do we want to have Chief Estes come up now? Chief Estes from CMPD.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. a couple of points that we'd like to make regarding the incident in Minneapolis, and then secondarily what we saw last night. So I first wanted to say that last night started out with peaceful protests that we support, and in fact, we agree with the sentiments that we heard and have heard throughout this time of protest activity. I think there's a misconception that permeates the community, which is to say that just because we wear and share a uniform with a badge on it means that we agree with the behavior that we saw that cost the life of a citizen. That couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, most of us who are given our adult lives to uphold all that's honorable and all that's good and trying to be a protector, a person that the citizens can look up to, and who upholds humanity at the highest regards, to see that challenged, that your life's work challenged by the behavior of someone whose actions were against, in my opinion, all of what humanity stands for. So in that, we agree. So last night we had active protests, peaceful protests that turned violent with throwing of rocks and bottles. We had 3 officers injured. We had multiple vehicles that were injured, that were damaged. We were engaged in active riot control with the use of chemical munitions to spread the crowd so that we create distance to keep everyone safe. And I want to make sure that everyone understands there's a difference between peaceful protests, which we absolutely support, and riotous behavior, damage to property, and injury to persons that we cannot and will not tolerate. So through that, we hope that today that the peaceful voices will be heard and not drowned out by violent action. And that's our goal for tonight. We're prepared, very best of our ability, to support those folks that are out protesting peacefully, and we will do our dead level best to de-escalate any type of tension that we see out there so that we can have a good and peaceful outcome to show that the citizens of Charlotte-Mecklenburg can voice their opinion in a peaceful way so that change might be realized.
Thank you, Chief Esty. Our first question will go to Brett Jensen.
This is for Mayor Lyles. This is for Mayor Lyles. Mayor, back in 2016, they had the curfew, but they did not issue the state of emergency, and they did not bring in the National Guard as a precaution. Is that a possibility, or was that even discussed to make sure what happened in 2016 doesn't happen tonight?
I have been asked to make that comparison today often, and I can say that I don't think that is an appropriate comparison to each other. What we're dealing with now is a national sentiment that perhaps isn't so much around the people that live in our own city or a family in our own city that has been hurt or harmed, or lost their life. So what we're doing is looking at this experience in the way that we need to provide safety and protection for our community, as well as any visitors, as well as any protesters. And so we have the state of emergency. There are a number of options in that state of emergency that we will only activate, and you will hear in advance if those actions are taken.
Hunter Saenz.
Hey there, Mayor Lyles. I got a couple questions in already when you were outside here, but I did talk to some of the people out here. One of them asked me, where are corporation leaders? And not just throwing money at problems, but where is their leadership in this? These fraternities and sororities said, we aren't those people, but we're here. Where are they?
Well, I think, let me start off with saying, last night when this happened, I heard from several corporate leaders, several former mayors, several people in this community that perhaps never paid any attention to what's going on in a civic or in a governmental way. And they called and they said, we are here to help make sure that we can be a part of this. we talk constantly with our executives in this community, the corporate executives. But I have to tell you, yesterday when I left this building at 5:30, I had no idea that by 8 o'clock I'd be in the situation that we were. I can't expect that we always are going to be able to pull everyone together. And so the first group that I pulled together was our city council members first, because they represent everyone in the city. And the second group was perhaps a little bit selfish. It was a pastor's group. And perhaps I needed a little bit more support of prayer and faith and candor at the same time. And so we'll continue to look and seek those groups out. In the past, we've often talked about activists. Can we ask them to come in and talk to us and share with us what they think, as well as other community leaders? We'll be doing that as we move forward.
Katie Peralta.
More of an understanding about what this state of emergency allows the city to do and what sort of curfew will be in place? I apologize if I missed that detail at first.
Well, we are not going to have a curfew in place unless, when we decide, or if we ever decide to have a curfew in place, it will be announced with enough time and enough understanding of what a curfew is. You know, a curfew does not stop people from going to work. A curfew does not mean that our hospitals and healthcare systems don't work. So I'm going to ask Chief Graham to come up, but I want you to know that right now what we've done is we're planning so that we can make good decisions without having to worry about how to implement them, working with the police and fire chief. Chief Graham?
Good afternoon, Katie. A state of emergency can, sometimes it sounds like it's very serious, and it is very serious, but we're under two. One currently for the pandemic, and that includes all the municipalities in the county, and now we're under one for civil unrest. So that only includes the city of Charlotte and the county, and all it really does at this point is it directs Mr. Jones, Ms. DiOrio, to use their powers as the city and county managers to direct the resources to handle the issue at hand, which is the current civil unrest. So I want to be very clear that we may be under this state of emergency for a very brief period of time, while the one for the pandemic may be much longer. Additionally, National Guard is already deployed in the city of Charlotte helping our Second Harvest Food Bank, and they've been here for some time, and we're excited to have them. So these are North Carolinians that are going to come and help us and may or may not be needed for this civil unrest. But the mechanism is there for our city leadership to ramp up or ramp down the restrictions as needed, depending on the situation on the ground. So I wouldn't get too sideways about the state of emergency. That is a administrative action that we would do for a lot of different things. And unfortunately, the mayor will tell you, emergency management knows where she is pretty much all the time. So, and along with the chairman. So thank you for the question.
Lindsay Klein.
Yeah, sorry, my question was answered in the last question.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Andrew Tatro.
Hi, Mayor. My question is for Chief Estes. Last night, I don't know if you guys saw, you had in New York City destruction to emergency vehicles. How is CMPD and CFD going to change their course of action from last night to tonight and the days forward if destruction to emergency vehicles such as fires and graffiti like that start to become an issue?
So I think I heard your question say, how do we protect vehicles and infrastructure from fire and damage, as we've seen in other places? And if that's the case, one of the things that we try to do is make sure that we protect our equipment that the citizens' hard-earned tax money pays for, by staging it in the correct places, making sure that we have drivers close by in case we get a riotous crowd to come and want to do some sort of damage. We recognize that is kind of a flagship moment for some protesters or rioters to be able to burn or otherwise damage public property. So we take specific steps to try to mitigate that. In a very chaotic situation like a demonstration or riot, it becomes very difficult sometimes. The crowd moves in unanticipated ways, and so we have to make sure that our operations are nimble enough to be able to move accordingly.
Courtney Davis from Spectrum.
Hi, Mayor. This is Courtney Davis with Spectrum News. I know that there has been some concern as to who is organizing some of these protests and everything. I just wanted to know, what the city is aware about with all of that, and are you guys concerned with people, being bussed in from other cities to cause some unrest here in the city as well?
So can I go back and compliment Chief Estes, because I think what he was saying first is people are first, property damage is second, or maybe not even on the list. People are what we're trying to make safe and protect. So I want to go to the question. I've had this question several times about, well, what about the outsiders? Someone could look at us and say, well, you're an outsider for even thinking about what happened in Minneapolis. I think this is a national issue. I think it's something that every community is having at some point to deal with. When I talked with Mayor Fry and Mayor Carter in Minneapolis and St. Paul, in some respects I was thinking, by the grace of God goes I. And this isn't something that I believe you say someone is an outsider because they feel so passionate about the issue of police and African American people. I actually think we need more people to be a part of this. Now, what I would say is that we do ask people that come into our city to remind themselves that we are trying to build great neighborhoods, and we're trying to make a city that has justice in it. We're trying to build a city that is creating opportunity. And if you would take any one of those values and honor it, then you would not be organizing in a way to hurt or harm any of those efforts. So what I say is that people are welcome to come into our city to protest, but we would expect them to honor and respect the people that live here and the people that are going to live here when they've gone. Is that it?
Allison Kuznets.
Also be a question for Chief Estes, but can you talk a little more about those outside groups and how CMPD is preparing for any protests that could also turn destructive from those groups of individuals tonight and in the coming days in Charlotte?
So for inside-outside groups, it's really irrelevant. As long as they stay peaceful, we welcome any and all. All citizens have a guaranteed constitutional right to protest peacefully, to get the word out as to what changes they want effected. So whether they're from out of town or for here or for wherever, we support that right. If a person, again, violates that by injuring someone or damaging someone's property, and we intervene, once again, really is irrelevant whether it's inside or outside. I get the emotional attachment from folks coming from other places to agitate. That certainly takes place, and it may take place tonight. But from a purely operational perspective, we have to be prepared to make sure that we protect people's rights. And then if they begin to initiate violence against people or property damage, then the nuts and bolts of it are that we ensure that we have enough officers in the right place who know how to do the right job the right way, who have the correct communications and the correct coordination, and are able to deal with people in protests in a humane way, in a safe way, in order to quell and stop whatever violent action is taking place.
David Mildenberg.
The mayors of St. Paul and Minneapolis have blamed so-called outside activists. So I don't think it's just reporters asking that question. Chief, thank you for your hard work on this. Could you provide the names of the organizations that are represented by these folks? And two, could you estimate how many people were injured last night and the amount of property damage as the mayor referred to? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. To answer your first question, I cannot. There are many and multiple people in organizations who say they're from organizations represented, so I couldn't begin to name all of them. Second, I can tell you that we had 3 officers who were injured, minor injuries. One we're still looking at. Those were rocks to hands, and we had an officer who took a rock to the head. From what I understand, they're all treated and released, though we're watching the one in the head. And then we had some windows broken out of a police station up in Metro Division, and then we had some windows smashed out of some police cars. As far as I know, we didn't have any injuries of note, at least that I'm not aware of any citizens, perhaps one, what I have heard of, but none officially.
Our final question of the day will go to Eric Spanberg. Eric, go ahead when you're ready.
This is for Mayor Lyles. Mayor Lyles, I wanted to ask you a two-part question. The first is what you would like to see or hear from business leaders. And then secondly, are you or the city providing any kind of guidance for business owners whose property may be affected by these ongoing protests?
So I'm going to take the second question first. We have instituted a number of changes that we have, and the Center City has a network of communication around incidents that are occurring, and yes, we have activated that network of businesses all the way from the Federal Reserve down to Gateway, the DoubleTree Hotel down there. And so we are getting them information that we can have, also working with them to understand what information we have and sharing that so that they can be prepared. It's a little bit different with the pandemic because we don't have as many businesses with people in them and that our stores or convenience areas operating. I always want to remind people that if you disrupt the convenience store or the small restaurant there, that's going to be a huge difference during a pandemic to the survival of that business. And so that's one of the things that we're so carefully talking to those owners of small businesses in the city right now. Your first question, I think I've forgotten it, Eric. So what was the first one?
Asking you what kind of response or reaction or help would you like from the corporate community and executives in particular?
Well, you know, first thing I want all of our community, whether you're a business leader, a small business owner, whether you're just a mom watching this, I want everyone in the city to understand that you have to walk in someone else's shoes before you can talk about how they feel or what they're doing. And I say that very seriously because I think that when we are talking about building community, we have to build it with an understanding of everyone's perspective and everyone's place in our community. When I started running for office, basically I said we wanted to be a city where everybody could live and work. And I mean that. And I think that that's what I'm going to continue to ask of our corporate leaders, our business leaders, our political leaders, our neighborhood leaders, that we need to create safe and beautiful neighborhoods so that people have a place to live. And we need to create jobs so that people have a place to work and earn a living so that they can afford to live here. That has not changed. I think if we do the simple things, the more difficult things will be a little bit easier. You can say we're going to try to live by the rule, to treat your neighbor as you would like to be treated, and to respect the people that work for you and understand what they're having to go through, especially when they're working in these situations in large corporations or small businesses, to understand that this city needs everyone to make it work well. So thank you all for the comments today. I really appreciate it. The Charlotte City Council members are people that give so much of their lives to these thoughtful discussions, and that it is important for us to recognize leadership in this community is widespread. So just like we talk about corporate leaders and neighborhood leaders, let us not forget our city council leaders as well. Thank you all.